Have you ever wondered how your sales performance compares against your competitors and peers? The B2B Sales Benchmark Report provides the definitive guide to what success looks like in 2021. See how you compare in terms of win rate, sales cycle, average deal value, relationships, and engagement. You can see the results and get the full report at ebster.com/B2B-sales-benchmarks. This is Sales Ops Demystified, the #1 most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales operations onto the show to deconstruct the why, what, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, the leading customer engagement platform for Salesforce. Welcome to a very special episode of Sales Ops Demystified. We are joined by Jag of Hitatchi Vantara, if I pronounce that correctly.
Hitatchi Vantara. But
Hitatchi Vantara. And so Jag has extensive experience as kind of business analyst and sales operations, which we're going to be digging into in the next 20 to 30 minutes. Jag, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So currently VP of EMEA Sales Operations for Hitatchi Vantara. How did you initially get into the sales ops field?
So I think if you look at the history of sales ops, it's probably no more older than probably 16 years as a profession. So it wasn't really a function that was necessarily called out outright. I think you may have other actors in the sense of a COO role, operations analyst role, but really as a competency, I think you'll find it's no older than probably 16 years. So for me, I began as an analyst that was good with data, and that was really my forte at the very beginning of my career. And that was heavily around things such as Excel, Cognos, Access, things of that order when I was good at it. Since then, the world's obviously changed a lot, and data is more of something that could be visualized in many different ways and through many different tool sets. So, I kind of moved on from there to things like business objects, and then progressed more into management roles, really, which, at this point, if I'm the operator of the tool, it's probably not the right thing, because there's far better people than me. And then, what I've really done over the last, half a dozen years now, really, is being at the forte with things around BI development. So, I've been privy to having teams that have orchestrated and run data sets of covering tools such as Power BI, ClickView, taking what was kind of bespoke Excel type data and putting it into data lakes and scaling at mass across, thousands of sales users through automation, as opposed to needing, bespoke ad hoc reporting, which, we're trying to kill as a trade, both at this company and other companies I've been at.
Got it. So you initially, when you were first doing sales operations work, you weren't actually labeled sales operations. You were working with data that helped drive decisions for the sales team.
Yeah, I would say the competency overall, I think, mid 2000s is probably where you would find it kind of came to the forefront under an umbrella as such. I mean, it used to be, actors such as business operations, like you'd find an analyst left, right, and center in many organizations. And I think you'll find mid 2000s is where many companies were looking at people in those roles to then say, okay, all of these things together point towards what is now considered sales operations. And, you found in there competencies such as compensation, process improvement, CRM, analysis, and those things together really form the basis of what you see sales ops today. And I've had purview to each of those attributes across the course of my career, because to be good in sales ops at the top level, you need to know each of those to some level, experts in some, but good working knowledge of all to really get an end-to-end view of the business.
Got it. And can you give us a picture of the sales ops team where you currently are? Like how many resources report into you?
Yeah, so at my current employer, I've been here just over half a year now. So across EMEA, we have a team of around 30 FTEs. So this is a software hardware business. So a little bit different to the 12 years I had at a prior company before this, where we didn't have to focus in on things such as supply. So here we have a selling motion. We have obviously the sales process and a CRM that sits underneath that. But at the very end of this, if it's a hardware sale, we have to sell kit, which then needs to be, shipped and sent for revenue recognition. So we cover that entire kind of front end of the funnel to the back end, which is, comp planning, go-to-market planning, making sure that people have the right tools and visibility to do their jobs, rolling up what is a sales forecast, making sure that we got the data sets to do this at a scalable, modern way that's, using automation as opposed to manual churn work. And then at the very end of that, we have to make sure the stuff can actually get shipped, we get rev rec, and from time to time, obviously things such as commission queries. So we're really tied in binary to the end-to-end process. And as always in operations, there's room to improve this stuff, which is where the opportunity and challenge is.
Sure. And how many sales people are you guys kind of responsible for?
So it's across the region that I'm responsible for. You'll find there's around 400. Some direct account quota carriers, and some obviously more overlay.
Do you have a view on the ideal ratio of sales ops to salespeople? Because if we do a quick calculation there, that's 30 over 400. That's about, I should really do 400 over 30. And that gets us to 13 reps per sales ops resource. In other conversations I've had, the golden ratio I've been shared is around 20. It's 25. Do you have any?
I think it's different depending on the maturity of the business. So I think a modern sales ops function in a modern organization, the numbers could be very different to the opposite. So I think it's a journey, right? I think what this is about is putting in the building blocks to make sure you get the automation that you need, throughout the entire sales process end to end. I think as you get that, the position of ops changes from tactical to strategic, right? Because then it's about not having an expert that can tell you what you need to know to run your business, but more about, well, how can you add value to me? Because the data, for example, if you're talking about analysis, is now on tap, right? I don't need an expert to get me data to tell me what my forecast is, right? I can see that for myself, right? So when you get to that level of maturity on the curve, then the value of ops is more about how can you strategically help me move forward, as opposed to help me create a PowerPoint that explains something about my business to my boss because he asks me a question every week, for example, right? So I think there's a journey that every org goes on. I don't think there's a magical ratio as such. Clearly there's a better way to do everything, and I think once an organization matures, I think all of those spans and layers can look very different.
Got it. Next question, and I want to ask about current sales ops tech stack that you're operating.
Yeah. So, no different to, most people, right? I think choices from a CRM perspective are largely based on, Salesforce or Microsoft. We're a heavy Salesforce user, and, wherever I've worked before has been largely the same. Now, there's good implementations, there's bad implementations, right? So, we always have work to do in that capacity in every org I've been at. So for us, it's Salesforce from the front end, and that ties us together from a marketing perspective, from a lead gen, and down to the sales reps from an account and opportunity mapping perspective in terms of the accounts and the leads, the opportunities, the contacts, et cetera, et cetera. So Salesforce is that, that kind of middle layer. And then, where we then go from there to quoting is layered in through a configure price quote tool. So we use a tool currently here called FBX. Seen various guises of something of a similar ilk. Ultimately, the challenge with all of these things is adoption, which is something that's front and center in our mind, because Salesforce for me is only as good as the data that's in it. Otherwise, we're checking the box to have it, but it needs to be something that's built into the DNA of sales, which means that we've obviously built it in a user-friendly way that it actually helps them, and it isn't just for ops to do reporting from.
So did you actively work with the sales team to configure Salesforce in a way that they'd actually want to use it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this done well. I've seen it done averagely. So, I would say early, well, maybe it's mid 2000s now. We had our first rollout of Salesforce.com at a prior company I was at, and I was kind of seconded over to be the representative of EMEA at the time for that type of project. And I would tell you, like that was the classic case of kind of ops trying to design the world without maybe thinking about the persona of the sales user at the time. And I just think the maturity of what a CRM should look like, I don't think anybody necessarily knew what it needed to be. But as we got better at it and we started recognizing things like sales process as a function and not a spin-off project, what then became from it was other spin-offs, such as going to constantly look at our processes and revise what they are to make sure they're optimum for sales, as opposed to being built for operational reporting. And then from there, what we created was user clinics with the end users. But you got to be careful with who you listen to as well, right? Because everybody has a good idea and you feel something to add, but at the end of the day, what you can end up with is a lot of clutter and nothing that's actually very useful to actually get the basics of the job done. And from time to time, it's been known of every company I've been at to have to go back to the simplistic view of an opportunity and start cutting back the number of fields that have been added through good intent, but have lost the basic DNA of what CRM is.
We have a quick question from Zach. Have you seen changes or shifts in the role? And if so, how do you overcome them? I guess this is looking back at your 18 or so years.
Yeah, I would say, look, if things are still the same as they were 10 years ago, you're clearly doing the wrong thing, right? The industry's moved on so much. If I think about what an ops role looked like 10 years ago and the kind of things it was doing for a sales leader, for example, if it's at the sales partnership level, it was very different. I would say you probably spent 60 to 70% of your time crafting through data so that you could then go and spend the rest of the delta to go and explain to the sales leader where the business is. Whereas now in that example, this stuff's on tap, right? If you build it well and you have good data, then you can scale, right? You can scale at a much better level. So the position therefore is now about, well, now that everyone can see everything, which is a good principle in life, you shouldn't only have ops or finance that can understand your data. How do I now take that forward and drive this into action, which is really where the fun happens, right? So that's where I see the big pivot is, the days of being good in ops and having a career just because the inner working of a company or how the data works. That's gone, right? And if that's still happening at your organization, I think you're in trouble because we need to empower people to move forward.
Nice. You touched on data quality in Salesforce only being as powerful as the data within it. Who's responsible for data quality in your team, and how are you currently dealing with that?
It's different in different places. So I think again, it's a maturity curve. So I think once you've got the muscle memory, you're more mindful of the downside of not having good data. But you need to go on a journey before you can even kind of respect the issues that you cause by not having it. So for example, I think we all own it, right? So if you're a sales guy and you don't have a passion to put your contacts in Salesforce, well, that's not going to help us, right? If you're a marketing person, you can't therefore do a campaign. If you're in support and you have contacts from end users with queries and you're not making sure that's a capture point, that's again an issue. So I think every single department owns it, but what you got to have is uniform systems that integrate across those contact points to make sure that there truly is an end-to-end tie-in. And I would say, the bigger the company, the bigger the issue, but sometimes just having pilots to get that right in small pockets is the way you start, getting a little bit smarter at it. So you just, I think getting the platforms unified is the key first step. But again, it comes back to, am I building a CRM to do reporting, or am I building a CRM to drive interaction with the customer and with the sellers? It should always be the latter. And I think if you have that natural thing happening, it's a flywheel effect, and I think it just naturally feeds itself.
I think that's a really big insight, because sales ops people want to build this thing to give them, or they want to build it for their own. In reality, that it's only going to be the best for the business if it's built with your interests, but also with the interests of everybody else using it.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a big insight.
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg, right? At the end of the day, you want this balance between having inputs that have useful outputs, but if it's all about the output, then that's just not going to be the user experience, right? I mean, if you take that back to normal life for you and me, if our social media was all about what one of those companies could get out of it, I don't think I would go in there, right? So, and you could argue we're probably on the tipping edge of probably being too much like that from my experience of some of these kind of systems, but there is a delicate balance there, right? Otherwise, you're going to be as bad as what you've designed.
Yeah, as bad as Facebook. No, I'm joking. Getting buy-in. So you mentioned just now about having people in customer success or in marketing managing or helping with data quality. How do you get buy-in from those other disparate teams in the organization to help you with your goals?
Yeah, I mean, you are the most mature companies I've been at, right? I mean, if you think about the annual planning cycle, right, you sit there with product development, you determine what products you're going to roll out, the roadmaps to make them better. You then go and determine the budget for the campaigns that are going to go and underpin those things. You've got your captive sales audience that need those things to be useful in the marketplace. Then you've got customer success that obviously need to tie those things out from a support perspective. So I think it comes back to what is the quality of your planning cycle and how much are you truly engaging across all those elements, and how much, perversely is done in a silo where you're not thinking across the entire landscape. And, where I've seen this work well, we did something, for example, maybe 18 months ago now, we called it a plan of record, which was effectively, okay, what's the plan of record for product? What are the goals? What are the commitments? What's happening on marketing? What's happening with sales? What's happening with success? And then you're kind of binary because, everyone's success is dependent upon each other and everybody's accountable to delivering what they said they would deliver. Otherwise, we all will fail together. So I think it's about making sure that connectivity happens from how you plan, because then you have common goals and ambitions to be successful together.
Got it. So actually you need to zoom out, and you're like, in the annual planning process, if everyone's aligned with the goals you're trying to achieve, then they're going to be bought in to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, but you gotta be willing to own the planning outside of planning, right? I mean, where I've seen planning done not greatly is, you issue your comm plans, the gun's gone off. We will go in a dark cupboard and come back again like 3 months to go from the end of the year to plan for the following year. You gotta live it into the DNA of what you agreed to make sure you're delivering against it. Otherwise, what you find is your accounts, the segmentation didn't quite get managed the way that you expected. The data quality goes down because if you narrow in on only quality during planning and don't live it, then you're just resetting the wheel every 6 to 8 months whenever you kick off your planning cycle.
Got it. Can you share some insights around onboarding salespeople? I assume with the 400 people in the sales team, you have some gems of knowledge to share about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my overall experience, I would say, if I looked across the board holistically of the roles I've had, is company onboarding generally is, good at the company level onboarding in terms of the products, how to go to market with them, how to go and talk them to the key customers about them. Now, day one in the job is for me where ops really kicks in, because I often find every company I've been at, there's a terrific onboarding kind of company level process. Sometimes is local, sometimes overseas, but day one in the job is okay. How do I use Salesforce in real life, real combat? How do I create a quote and get it through the motion of an approval process? And that's where you need a more holistic view from ops at the back end, which is more of an operational kind of onboarding piece. And a buddy system works well, right? I mean, sometimes people just need regular clinics, places to call into. And I think if you have that chemistry, then you're going to have people be more effective day one, as opposed to all hell breaking out at the end of a quarter trying to get a quote through and they don't know what they're doing. So, there's different levels of maturity at different places I've worked, but that's where I've seen it working best, is when you contribute at the ops level to really do that.
From day one, as soon as they join.
Yeah, in the job, post training, post the company onboarding, because that's when real life really kicks in with a lot of these guys.
Yeah, you spend like a week or two just like in a classroom, like learning about stuff, like getting really inspired, and then you realize, oh, I actually have to do this. Productivity of sales reps.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how do we measure, which I think is the kind of proxy for your question. So really, in terms of talent management, right, it's a key contributor to what I've worked on over the last 5 years at different places and spaces. So you got to have a contribution of subjective and objective, right? It can't just be a bunch of ops and finance data and HR data. You got to be cognizant of what the manager thinks, because ultimately what you're trying to get to is a consistent benchmark of what good looks like, right? So what we were big advocates of, and we saw this then scale globally into a standard process, was making sure that we took the best of all of these breeds of data and management views to try and get a consistent view. But the trick is to do this through automation, not a one-time pony for a QBR, and then you walk away and then nothing happens, right? So for me, what we started to do was we started to look at a balance of subjective and objective, right? So the subjective pieces were things like, what's the skill of the individual, right, to do their job? So you would have a grading, of 1 to 5 for that. You'd have a grading of 1 to 5 for will, a grading of 1 to 5 for coachability, and there was very consistent markers for what you need to be at the top level of that, right? So that's a management view, right? And we would also, in addition to that, ask the managers 2 other questions, which was, if this person left the company, what's the impact to the company? And are they a flight risk, right? So then that kind of gets the management view of the individual on the table. But then what we would do is, to elevate the conversation, is we would add some of the objective data in. So you'd have the company records. You'd have things like attainment, coverage, win rates, profitability, performance data, training hours. So how many classes have they attended that are going to help them improve in their job? And then what you end up with is the best of both the subjective and the objective. And then really, where you end up is, okay, if I'm going to go do a QBR in Brazil, I've already got all of my employees rated by the managers in an online tool, perhaps, which is how we rolled with this. And it meant every one of our QBRs was consistent. And what would happen is the leader in that particular market or geo or segment would stand there and talk about their people. But then, what would happen in the room amongst the other managers is that they would look at those ratings and say, well, hold on. The data doesn't quite say that the rating is the way you have it, but then you get that transparency between the management set of what does good look like by having all of this kind of joint up together. But you have to do this in a scalable way, because that's how you get to that consistent view of what good looks like, without creating the weeks of operations work to create content and decks, if you will, to show that view of the business. But I think if you get to that maturity curve and you have a sales leader driving it, not an ops person, by the way, that's really kind of preaching this to his guys or girls, then I think you really get to elevate it, right? Because I think it becomes a scalable model, becomes a consistent model, and the KPIs become something that get lived, as opposed to a one-time show.
Was that something that you implemented, like this subjective and objective? That was something that you brought.
Yeah, that was something we implemented globally across 1,200 employees.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And did you bring that over from a previous business, or did you how did you
so we had a new sales leader who had some ideas. We had our own ideas, and it was just the formation of the 2 of those things together. But what we wanted to do was to be a bit edgy and drive this through technology, as opposed to just checking the box. And then what we ended up with it was a standard that was then being pushed around the other 11,000 employees in the organization to go down the same route. But it came from a fabric of trying things in a more innovative way, as opposed to just okay, well, here's the PowerPoint. So and it really elevated our brand for a part of the business that was going for a huge turnaround. In fact, we took it from negative year-over-year growth for 2 years to growth. And I think one of those things was just starting to get some accountability back into the org through being, good at how we managed our people.
So to be clear, you were rolling this out just for sales reps, but then the business saw the impact and then took it to every employee.
Yeah. That one got to the board level presentation, and we were in the process there to then roll that out across the bigger half of the company, across all of the direct sellers, the indirect sellers, and to make that a standard for the company.
Nice. I bet that felt pretty good.
It did. Yeah, it also created a lot more work.
Yeah, true. Quick question. This is a very broad one, so it'd be interesting to get your take. And I might actually challenge you to try and keep the answer to this to 2 sentences, just I think it'll be interesting. How do you define and measure success in sales operations?
Speed. One word.
Nice. One word.
We got to, if we're not making something, faster in a better way, of course, then what are we doing, right? Are we just keeping the lights on? So, everything we do needs to drive more speed.
KPIs, what are you currently tracking? Or maybe a better question is, what do you think are the most valuable KPIs for you as sales ops leader?
So I think it's different depending on the issues that you're experiencing. So if you're experiencing growth, the KPIs are, different. If you're experiencing, some momentum shift downwards, you're looking a little bit harder for the answers. So, I think that there are some basic principles, right? You want to get into how much pipeline are people generating, how many leads are they, are coming through to them, what's the quality of the stuff that's in the funnel, how much is in there that's just age that is going absolutely nowhere, how much accountability are you then being able to drive with the metrics, right? Is it visible to just me, or is it visible down to the individual manager that's managing the sales executive, right? So it's being very thoughtful about what you measure depending on the situation, but making sure most critically this stuff is not held for a corner office somewhere, but instead it's it works at the top down to the bottom of the layer, because at the end of the day, metrics are only good if they drive action at the bottom. So we got to be thoughtful what we build and how we share, because obviously there's some privacy issues you got to then sometimes work through when you share too much. But for me, everything we design needs to work both at the macro and down to the manager that's managing the sales exec.
Got it. And a final question is, who taught you what you know about sales operations?
I've had a bunch of great experiences at many companies I've worked at. I've had some really good mentors. There's two that really stick out for me. A prior company that I would say were the biggest contributors for me. So, there's a guy called Joe Renz who does a lot now with AI and automation with cars. And then there's another guy that I worked with at CA, Oliver Maskell, who now works for a technology company that is similar to a fruit, so you may guess the company. And he's doing something great there at the moment with sales ops with that company. So they've probably been the two best that I've worked with, both from a mentoring and day-to-day leadership perspective.
So it's Oliver and James.
Oliver and Joe Renz, yeah.
Shout out. Okay, so I've got a whole host of little bullet points that I wrote down here. So let me try and cover them. Always work to do. I think that's always work to do on the sales process or the CRM. I'm not sure what I wrote there. Salesforce only being as good as the data that sits within it. Everybody owning and being responsible for data quality, and you can do that effectively by planning together and getting people bought in. The pretty automated and super interesting way you rolling out performance reviews with both the subjective and the objective data. And then finally, sales operations success being measured by speed.
Absolutely. Yep.
There we go.
You nailed it.
Oh no, you nailed it, Jag. That was an absolute masterclass. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure that was invaluable for people listening.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.